We're going to talk about the prayers of Jesus and how we might answer some questions in our own prayer lives about exactly how Jesus prayed and how that might help us to pray. You know, I can do a lot of things that are pretty simple. But there are a lot of things Jesus did that I cannot do. I cannot walk on water. Anybody here walk on water? There was a translucent bridge built a few years ago on the Sea of Galilee. And it was right below the surface, and you could pay to walk on that bridge and make it look like you were walking on water. I guess you got your picture taken. I don't think it lasted very long. I hope it didn't. No matter what powers you give me, I can't go to Long John Silver's and get a 3-piece meal and feed 5,000 people. There is no way I can do that. I cannot touch somebody and they be able to get up and walk when they couldn't walk before, or hear when they couldn't hear before, or see when they couldn't see before. There's so many things Jesus did that I will never, ever be able to do. But there's one thing he did that we can all try to do. Probably not with the same efficacy that he did. But everybody in this room can do something that Jesus did a lot of. And that is, we can all pray. But if I talk to 10 Christians and I ask them, what's the part of your spiritual life you would most like to improve, or do you feel like is the least effective, 8 or 9 will say, I'm not sure I know how to pray. So that's what I want us to talk about today. How should we pray, particularly if we're not very active in prayer? And I want us to start with some words from Jesus from Matthew chapter 6. These words are going to tell us his attitude about not making religion a show. So look with me, chapter 6. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you'll have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, don't announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they've received their reward in full. But when you pray, now here's what I want you to focus on. Let's just look at this verse. We're going to come back to it. When you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they'll be heard because of their many words. Don't be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. And then we're going to go here. Luke chapter 18. You heard how Jesus said to pray. Now we're going to see how not to pray. Luke 18, beginning with verse 9. To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everybody else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. And the Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, even this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give 1/10 of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He wouldn't even look up to heaven, But he beat his breast. He said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. What does this say about prayer? Well, I want to go back centuries before this to a prophet of God whose story is told in 1 Kings chapters 17 through 20. His name is Elijah. And Elijah had the bad taste to get a king and queen angry at him. And they wanted him killed. But before they wanted him killed, they had a battle between God, Yahweh of Israel, and a god called Baal. And if you read that story in 1 Kings, it tells that Baal's prophets, 450 of them, had a duel, a spiritual duel, if you will, with Elijah, 450 to 1. And Baal's prophets cried out to their God, and there was no answer. And they bowed before their God, and there was no answer. And then they did the ridiculous thing. They slit their wrist. They cut themselves to try to get their God to listen to them. And Elijah just prays. So one of the things I want you to see is this business that prayer is not groveling to God. You don't have to hurt yourself to pray. But why in the world do we not pray? If I can talk to the creator of all the universe, why don't I pray? Well, I think it's intimidating because we elevate certain folks and say their prayers are more efficacious than others. And it makes the rest of us feel a little impotent. Well, I pray and I don't get miracles. I pray and I don't get a new car. I pray and my team doesn't win. What's going on here? Why am I not getting? And then you read books. I prayed this prayer and miracles happened. And you think, well, I must just not be praying right. Well, I want us to get past that. And I want us to talk about what does it mean to really pray? Because you see, if we listen to certain celebrities, it seems that prayer for us is unattainable. All of us pray in the emergency room, don't we? There used to be an old saying in World War II, there are no atheists in where? Foxholes. Remember that? No atheists in foxholes. I don't think there are any atheists in the emergency room either. At least there haven't been when I'm there. But what do we do about praying day to day to day to day to day? Here's what I want to recommend to you, that we begin to develop a system, a pattern of how to pray. And I want to go with the words of Jesus, and I want to go with the augmentation of that by two people that I really appreciate. One, a preacher, the other, an author. The words of Jesus back in Matthew. Go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father. Pretty simple, isn't it? No long, drawn-out formulas. You have to say this, then you have to say this. You have to face the east. You have to give this. Just go in your room, close the door, and pray. John Killinger is from Somerset, Kentucky. One of the most noted preachers, pastors of the last quarter of the 20th century. John's written 50 books, but he wrote a little bitty one that I've got, but I've loaned it out to somebody and I can't find it. And it's about how to pray. And if you've got it, you can bring it back, all right? It's just called How to Pray. And John talks about how that it seems like we make prayer this Mount Everest that we can never climb, but he talks about doing exactly what Jesus says here. John says that for him, it's very helpful to have a room that is completely dedicated to when he goes there, he's going to pray. And he's set himself up a little safe place, if you will. And it has a candle he lights just because he likes aroma. And it has some artwork that reminds him of the power of God. And he just goes there. And here's the thing that's so important for us. It's really tough to pray for a while until we get rid of distractions. Do you know my favorite distraction? So when I'm going to pray, it has to go away. So the first thing John says is to find a place. It could be the car on the way to work. It could be a cubicle at your office. Could be an easy chair at home. But find a place where the distractions are limited. John talks about how that when you begin talking to God, you simply say, God, this is what I've done today. This is what I've got to do today. This is what I did all day. And slowly but surely, it's going to take a while. You begin to communicate with God. So the first thing he talks about is a place. The second thing is no distractions. And then just talk to your Father. John has one way of doing it. Another person I admire is an author. Her name is Anne Lamott. And Anne Lamott is a person who's had a hard time in life, some of her own creation. Anne Lamott has been a drug addict and is a recovering alcoholic. And she's a Christian. And she's dealing with all of her struggles. And Anne Lamott says that there are 3 essential prayers. And they're pretty simple. And I want to read you some of what she says. Anne Lamott says the first word of prayer is help. Help. And I want to read you what she says about that. This is a person who has been in tough times in her life. Here's a quote. Well, I've heard people say that God is the gift of desperation. And there's a lot to be said for having really reached a bottom where you've run out of any more good ideas or plans for everybody else's behavior or how to save and fix and rescue or just get out of a huge mess, probably of your own making. And when you're done, you may take a long, quivering breath and say, help. People say help, sometimes without actually believing that anybody hears. But it is the great prayer. And it is the hardest prayer. Because to say it, you have to admit defeat. And you have to surrender, which is the hardest thing any of us will ever do. Which is why when we talk about the 12 steps of recovery, the first is acknowledge that I have a higher power, right? Isn't that what we do? We talk about there is a higher power and it's not me. And then we talk about what? Realizing that I am, listen to this word, powerless. Powerless to deal with some issues in my life. And that's when Anne Lamott says, we yell help. The first essential prayer, she says, is help. The second is just as simple. And she says that prayer is thanks. Thanks. She said for a lot of people that's the beginning of prayer. But her idea is before we realize any thanks, we realize we need help. And it's a reminder that we don't create ourselves and we can't heal ourselves. I don't want you to raise your hands, but do any of you still write thank you notes? Still get thank you notes in the mail? You know, those little cute cards like that. If you've never prayed a lot or you want to increase your prayer life, I want you to think with me about her ideas. First of all, help. We all know that. That's what we say in the ER, isn't it? That's what we say when the blue lights turn on and we've been speeding, isn't it? Help! But thanks. If you have trouble getting into prayer, I want to suggest something that somebody suggested to me 4 years ago. And it's to write God a daily thank you note. I have a little book in my desk. And about 4 years ago, this person said to me, I have found it is a better day when I begin my day at the office by giving thanks. And the person said, what I do is I write down 3 things every morning before I turn the computer on. I write down 3 things I'm thankful for today, or 3 people, or 3 events. I've been doing that for 4 years now. I'm slavish about it. I walk into the office, I turn on the light, I pull the little red book out of my desk, and I write down my 3 things. It's the first thing I did when I got here this morning, because it helps me focus on the fact that I ought to be giving thanks to God. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. But for me, this is the day the Lord has made, and I need to remember there is a reason to be grateful, even if it's not a very good day. I look back at that little booklet, some of its loose leaf papers in a file in my desk, and I look back at it. Sometimes I look back, what was I grateful for 3 years ago today? Sometimes it's one of you. Sometimes it's that it quit raining. Sometimes it's I didn't get stopped on Stone Drive when I should have. You have to be pretty thorough with this, you know what I mean? But I want you to think about it. Help and thanks. Now, the third word is not a Bible word, but it's one of my favorite words. I may have said it yesterday about 5:30. Wow! Wow! Anne Lamott says this is her favorite word of prayer. Wow! And she says, I see it when I walk out and see the sky, a blue sky and mountains. I see it when I see an eagle fly. I see it when I see a baby. Wow! The sheer beauty of creation. Now, this is not a doctoral degree in prayer. It's a place to start. And I believe Jesus epitomized help. The Lord of all creation is in the Garden of Gethsemane. The shadow of the cross is lingering right over the hill in the night sky. Help. Lord, if there's any way at all, let me out of this. Help! Help! Jesus said, help. Thanks. When he got those loaves and fish, he broke the bread and he did what? He gave thanks, and a miracle happened. Miracles may happen when gratitude becomes a part of who we are. But the third word, wow. He never said wow. You can read the New Testament all the way through. He never said wow. I wish he had, but the word hadn't been created yet. It didn't come along for 16 centuries. A 16th century Scotsman created the word. I imagine after he got a hole in one at St. Andrews. I'm not sure. Wow. Jesus never said it, but I think he would have. So here's my thing. I'm never going to pray like Jesus. Not with the same intensity, because I'm not him. I'm never going to walk on water. I'm never going to heal people. Never going to feed thousands. But I can pray. I don't need to feel guilty about it. I just need to start. So maybe the way you can start is to find a place, to find a time, and if no other words come, I'd suggest you start with help and go to thanks and end with wow.